This is a gaming PC I built for only $200. At that price, some might think this is a weak and incapable system, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This isn't just an esports machine. It can play much more than light titles like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Valorant, etc. This thing can game. I'm talking modern and even a number of more recent AAA titles. Now with that said, I'm going to be real with you, this wasn't made with magic, so it's not a 4K or 1440p, high refresh rate, ultra settings monster of a rig. It was only $200 after all, and made up of mostly used parts. But it can handle 1080p, 60 FPS, sometimes more, medium to low settings, and for the price, I think that's more than reasonable. I was able to build this with some deal hunting, and I honestly think that a lot of you out there should be able to build something similar to this, performance-wise, for around the same price. I'll go over all of that and give tips on how to allocate your budget accordingly, and I'll also talk about the pros and cons of doing a build like this, because as you can imagine, with only $200, some compromises have to be made. So I'll discuss that so that you can decide for yourself if you think something like this is worth it or not. But before that, let's go over what's inside right after this. If you're building a new PC and don't want to pay $100+ for a Windows license, check out the sponsor of this video, scdkey.com. They sell both Windows 10 and Windows 11 OEM keys for a fraction of their retail price. I'm often asked what the benefits are to activating Windows, since you can technically use it unactivated, but doing so, you'll constantly be reminded to activate by an annoying watermark on the bottom right of your screen, and you'll also be severely limited when configuring your PC how you'd like. Taskbar settings, themes and colors, wallpapers, screensavers, locked screen start menu, you'll be locked out from customizing all these without activation. Check out the links in the description to unlock the full potential of your Windows install today, and use code NOBE25 to save 25% off your purchase. Once you get the key, it's as easy as searching for the activation settings in the start menu, clicking change product key, and entering it in to be activated within seconds. Thanks SCDKey for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. We'll start off with the processor, Intel's Xeon E5 2640V4. This has a whopping 10 cores, 20 threads, and when it was released, the recommended price was nearly $1,000. Keywords there being when it was released, because this processor is getting up there in age. Despite this being almost 9 years old, these are great for low budget builds, because these days you can find them used on AliExpress for a mere $5, and that's not something you have to deal hunt for either. They're always in stock and reliably at this price. This is pretty nuts, because when I think of a $5 processor, I think of something that's outdated and borderline e-waste. I don't think of something that's capable of running modern games. I bought this in a CPU motherboard bundle on AliExpress for roughly $32 before tax after a coupon, and there's a bunch of these combos at varying prices. They'll have different CPUs with varying core and thread counts as well as clock speeds. After browsing through all the different options and comparing them side by side, I decided on the 2640V4 based on specs and price. The motherboard comboed with the Xeon is this Micro ATX Zsus X99P4. I know Zsus sounds like a knockoff of Asus. I don't know if they were intentionally biting off the name or if it just happened to be a coincidence. Spending this little on a motherboard, I definitely don't expect it to have all the features that more modern boards have, like USB-C, RGB headers, and a ton of I/O, but this board did surprise me by having an M.2 slot, which is pretty convenient. Unfortunately, I won't be using it because I got a SATA SSD, but hey, it is there for easy future expandability. This board also does have 4 DIMM slots, which I don't fill up all the way, but that leaves the option to easily add more memory later on if needed. So the Xeon I'm using is an LGA 2011 socket CPU, which means that I couldn't just use any of those really affordable sub $20 coolers on Amazon from like Thermalright, ID Cooling, VTrue, etc. Those don't support LGA 2011 mounting, so I had to do a bit of searching, and since the overall budget was pretty small, I literally chose the cheapest tower cooler I could find at the time, which was this Osdom cooler. I've never heard of this brand before, but it was on sale on Amazon for $15. This has 6 heat pipes and is about the same size as all the other budget coolers mentioned earlier, and it does a great job at keeping the Xeon cool. My only complaint about this cooler is that the included fan has fixed LED lights. This is basically, Mom, I want RGB fan, and she's like, no, we have RGB fan at home, and this is RGB fan at home. For this build, because we are working with such a small budget, I'll let it slide. Also, because I won't be using this fan anyways, which I'll get into later. For the graphics card, I went with the tried and true RX 580 8GB. Outside of the periods when crypto turned the GPU market upside down, this card has been very affordable ever since it's released. It launched in 2017 at $230 MSRP for the 8GB version and offered great performance for the price at the time. Nowadays, SSDs are abundant in the used market, and I actually bought this one for a ridiculously low price of $20. And I don't expect many people to find these for that cheap, so I'll adjust that in the price summary to something that's more attainable while still being a good deal. This card is 7 years old, going on 8, but it still pumps. You just have to keep your expectations in check though. 1080p, around 60 FPS, and some of the newer, more demanding titles may be using FSR to help it reach that mark, which I do want to highlight is a huge blessing. FSR and DLSS get a lot of flack from the community for a number of reasons, but I think situations like this, where it is used to uplift much older hardware to keep them still relevant, I think the tech should be praised. I picked up the 16 gig kit of Clizri ECC memory rated at 2400 CL15 from AliExpress. I bought ECC memory because I thought the Zseuss X99 board required it, but that ended up being an error on my part because I misread the listing. So yeah, I could have just bought regular DDR4 memory, so this is just for your information in case you do buy this board and already have DDR4 on hand or can find it for cheaper than its ECC equivalent. Storage wise, this system is rocking 2.5 inches. Of SSD, of course. This is a 500 gig Samsung 860 EVO. I picked this up at a local PC recycling shop in my area for 22 bucks. Most people buying new SSDs for their builds today will go with NVMe, but I think SATA-based ones are still fine, especially considering that a lot of systems in this price range usually won't have an M.2 slot anyways. For the record, I did ask the shop if they had any NVMe drives for sale, but they didn't at the time.
NVMe?
Yeah.
Not sure. Let me look.
Okay.
Gonna be NVMe or SSD as well?
You know what? The 2.5 inch SSDs would be fine too. I was already there for a power supply and figured why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone and knock another part off the list. Speaking of power supply, we've got this Corsair TX750 that I also picked up from the same shop and was the main reason I went there in the first place. I got this for $25, and if you've been building PCs for a while, you may recognize the label on this because this model was very popular in the early 2010s. For this unit that I have specifically, I have no idea the age or how heavy or lightly it was used. I did pick it up from a PC recycling shop after all. They do test all their parts though and give a return window in case anything goes wrong, so that gave me time to test it myself, and I threw an RX 6900 XT at it, which by itself consumed nearly 300 watts and had no issues. This system with the Xeon and RX 580 at max load pulls 350 watts from the wall, a number that's low enough for me to be comfortable with. I grabbed a black 24-pin cable extension from AliExpress for 4 bucks because the ketchup and mustard is really bad on the TX750's 24-pin. And last but not least, the case, which is this Paddle Mini Case Seaview Room MATX that I got from AliExpress for a crazy low price of $23 before tax. Now because of how much I paid, I was expecting it to be pretty low quality, but man was I wrong. This thing surpassed my expectations. It's got a front to side glass, open view obstructionless design, which is one of the more recent hot new trends in the case space, so that's kind of nice to see in a case priced this low. The build quality isn't bad by any means either. The panels are on the thinner side, but at least this has common sense design practices implemented. Like look at this glass side panel. No holes in the glass for thumb screws to go through. This glass panel has proper metal lips adhered to it to attach itself to the case. There's also a power supply basement with plenty of room to tuck all the cables of the old school non-modular power supply I got, as well as a decent amount of space to run all the cables where they need to go without any bulging of the side metal panel. Sure, there's no rubber grommet or cable raceways, but that's kind of to be expected at this price. This doesn't come with any fans, so I grabbed this set of Thermalright 120mm ARGB fans. This cost $13 always. This isn't a sale price, this isn't a coupon price, this is the all the time price. I don't know how Thermalright does it, but for anyone who wants addressable RGB fans on a budget, these provide pretty unbeatable value. One of these fans will be going on the CPU cooler like I mentioned earlier to replace that fugly one that came with it, and the way the ventilation on the paddle case works out, only 2 of the fan locations are really useful anyway. Since the motherboard doesn't have an ARGB header to control the fan LEDs, I used this SATA powered controller from AliExpress that only cost $2, and it has some basic lighting modes pre-programmed in, including solid colors, which is the mode I have it set to. Let's take a look at the build summary and price breakdown. As a reminder, I'll double the price of the RX 580 here to make it more reasonable than the $20 crazy deal that I got it for. Doing that, the build total comes in just barely over $200 before tax. Now, if you're not as experienced with deal hunting or simply don't have as good of prices in your local area, I've also made a modified list for reference if you had $250 to spend. I omitted the aesthetic parts here and grabbed some plain black black fans instead of the RGB ones, and this breakdown gives you a little bit more room to work with for some of the key parts. Also, a big money saver if you're building something this low of a price is to get a case used. People often get rid of their old cases for dirt cheap, and even sometimes for free on OfferUp and Facebook Marketplace, just because, you know, they take up so much space. I've even given away free cases before, and I picked up some for free, so definitely consider that option if you are having trouble coming within budget. This build was such a breeze to put together, mostly due to the case not being a horribly designed, half thought out mess that most cheaper cases tend to be. Because of that, it didn't feel like I was building a $200 PC at all. It felt like I was building something closer to $400 or $500. I'll let this time-lapse build sequence play out, followed by some B-roll glamour shots. Alright, so time for the benchmarks. As stated earlier, the target resolution for this is 1080p, and I ran my regular benchmarking suite against it, which includes games that I usually test against systems much more expensive than this. Also, because a lot of the times games are bottlenecked by the graphics card, I wanted to see how far that $5 Xeon in here could go if there was no GPU bottleneck at all. So as I usually do, I tested this system as is, and then I also tested it with this in it. This is an RX 7800 XT. This card alone costs more than double this entire system. This is $200, this is $450. So during the benchmarks, take a look at the numbers between both sets of runs, and it should paint a pretty clear picture as to which titles the RX 580 is holding back the build, and which ones the Xeon is holding it back. But yeah, without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the benchmarks.
Sing it louder.
So how about them benchmarks? I don't know about you, but I think those results are phenomenal for $200 spent. As we saw, there was room for a better graphics card in this build for a majority of the games, but not for all of them. For example, look at the difference in Halo Infinite, which was the most extreme case of the GPU bottleneck. That uplift was massive going to the 7800 XT. Do note though that in a lot of the games, even though the average FPS increased by quite a bit, the 1% lows often stayed relatively the same. In these situations, there's not really a point in having such an high average when the gameplay would feel pretty inconsistent due to the wide gap between that and the 1% lows. It'd be better to just have a lower average frame rate closer to the 1%. Just look at the difference in smoothness between the frame rates and frame time graphs. So yeah, you could use a more powerful graphics card in this build, but I wouldn't go with anything stronger than say like a GTX 1070, 1070 Ti, or any of the 1660 variants. The last thing I do want to talk about before wrapping up are the pros and cons of a system like this. For the pros, the most obvious thing will be the low price. And it's not just affordable, as you saw, it's actually quite capable. And another pro is that it's easy to part hunt for. The heart of the system, the Xeon 2640B4 and the X99 board, those are both really easy to find for a low price thanks to AliExpress. And this is important because CPUs and motherboards are the most restricting components when it comes to compatibility, making them harder to deal hunt than anything else, especially for lower price builds like this. Like the case, power supply, RAM, SSD, graphics card, all of those are pretty universal and give you much more freedom and like flexibility in comparison. So yeah, having the CPU and motherboard be easy to find is definitely one of the pros in my opinion. And for the cons, I think there's only really one that sticks out for me that is going to be the major deal breaker for a lot of people, if it is one, and that's the severely limited upgrade path for the system. You're pretty much stuck on an old platform that even maxing out the socket with the most capable processors that's compatible with it will still be quite behind a modern system. Another con is that there's usually no warranty with used parts, which makes up the majority of this build. If something goes wrong and a part dies unexpectedly, you have to replace it fully on your own dollar. That's just a trade-off with the savings you get, you know? I buy used parts all the time, but I've also got quite a bit of experience dealing with them and have the means to troubleshoot should anything go wrong. Not everyone is in the same position. I'm not trying to scare people away from buying used parts, it's just something you should consider. Based on those pros and cons and a price point of $200, what do you think? Worth it or nah? You guys already know my opinions on this. I think this thing is awesome for $200 and still great even at $250, but now I want to hear what your thoughts are. How do you think I did on the build overall with regards to the price, the performance, and the aesthetics? And what would be the maximum price you think someone should pay for a system like this? Not everybody agrees on pricing. Some people might think this is worth even less. Some think even more than what I think. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below. But that's gonna be it for me though. Hope you all enjoyed and found this video either useful or entertaining in one way or another. I want to thank you all as always for watching and for continuing to support the channel. Huge shout out to the channel members and super gifters for their above and beyond support. As always, be safe out there and I'll see you all down in the comments as well as the next stream and or video. Bye.